I met a writer named Mike Carson at a literary festival in the city. He was a tall, lanky man with a shock of unruly brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 stories. He didn't just scribble down ghost stories. His tales carried a weight of truth that you could feel in your bones. They weren't just about spooky happenings, but about the dark corners of human nature, the lingering echoes of sorrow, and the whispers of the beyond that seeped into our lives. I remember being drawn to his booth, captivated by the cover of his latest book, Whispers from the Edge. It depicted a lone figure walking across a desolate beach, the setting sun casting long shadows that stretched towards a swirling vortex in the sky. It was an image that stayed with me long after I'd left the festival. We talked for a while, discussing the craft of writing and the power of stories. He told me he'd been writing since he was a child, but lately, he felt like his creativity was stagnating. He was tired of the city, of the constant noise and bustle, and the stories he'd been trying to write felt hollow, devoid of the raw energy that had always fueled his writing. "I need a change," he said, his voice raspy. "Something to shake things up, to get the dust off my soul." That's when he told me about his plan. He was moving to a small coastal town, a place where the ocean waves crashed against the shore, and the air was filled with the scent of salt and sea. He'd heard about an old, abandoned property on the outskirts of town, a place whispered to be haunted. He was drawn to the mystery, the potential for stories that would reach deeper than anything he'd ever written before. I watched him go, fascinated by his ambition. He was chasing a ghost, literally and metaphorically, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this whole endeavor was going to be more than just a story. Months later, I got a postcard from Mike. It was a simple, handwritten note, accompanied by a grainy photograph of an old, weather-beaten house perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed below, a white curtain of foam against the dark gray rock. He wrote about the peacefulness of the ocean, about the calming rhythm of the waves, and how the air felt different, filled with a kind of energy he hadn't felt in years. "It's like the ocean is breathing life back into me," he wrote. "I feel like I'm finally getting somewhere with the story. I'm writing a book about this town, about the local tribes, about how a simple human life can change in an instant when spirits cross into our world." It was intriguing, a new direction for his stories. He also talked about a cafe he'd found, called Billy's Brew, where he would often spend hours writing on the back balcony, overlooking the sea. He told me about his new book, which centered around a local legend. He had imagined a scenario where a circle of candles surrounded a mirror, and if you had the right photo hanging above it, you could summon a soul from the other side. He described it as a simple ritual, a way to connect with the departed, but one that carried a dangerous element. It felt haunting, almost prophetic, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as I read his words. Time passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see Mike, to understand what was happening to him, to see if those whispers he was writing about had begun to seep into his own reality. I packed a bag and drove to the coastal town, determined to find him. The town was small, a cluster of houses clinging to the cliffs, with a single main street lined with quaint shops and cafes. I found Billy's Brew easily, a charming little place with a bright blue paint job and a cozy interior. The barista, a young woman with a warm smile and a friendly demeanor, told me that Mike lived in a place called Old Dunes Manor, a dilapidated house on the edge of town. "It's said to be haunted," she added, but Mike seemed to find it inspirational. The drive out to Old Dunes Manor was a little eerie. The road snaked around the cliffs, offering breathtaking views of the ocean but also revealing a growing sense of isolation. The house stood at the very edge of the cliff, silhouetted against the setting sun. It looked as if it had been abandoned for years, the paint peeling, the windows boarded up. I parked down the road, taking a deep breath before approaching the house. It was a strange feeling walking up to the front door. The air felt thick and heavy, like a shroud of sadness had settled over the place. I knocked on the door, expecting to hear the sound of my fist against wood, but instead, it was a hollow, echoing thud. I called Mike's name, but there was no answer. I turned the handle, expecting it to be locked, but it opened with a rusty groan. I stepped inside, the air immediately turning stale and cold, like the house had been holding its breath for years. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. I walked through the house, each room a testament to a life turned upside down. A bookcase crammed with books, the pages yellowed with age, a dusty easel with brushes scattered on the floor, a half-written manuscript left abandoned on a desk. It was as if Mike had simply walked out of the house, leaving everything behind, as if he had been swept away by the very stories he was writing. As I explored the house, a strange feeling began to creep over me, a sense of unease that grew with every step. I felt as if I was being watched, as if something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to leave. I stopped at the top of the stairs, feeling the weight of the silence press down upon me. I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't see anything. I started to feel afraid, the kind of fear that comes from knowing you are not alone, that you are being observed by something you cannot see. I decided to leave, to get out of that house, to escape the feeling of being watched. As I turned to go, I felt a cold hand grip my arm, squeezing tightly. I screamed, whirling around to see who or what was holding me. But there was nothing there. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I ran, stumbling out of the house, the cold air stinging my lungs as I fled down the path. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my body trembling with fear. I threw the car door open, slammed it shut, and sped away from the house, leaving it behind in the darkness. I drove all night, fueled by the adrenaline in my veins, until the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the horizon. I stopped for coffee, trying to calm my nerves, trying to make sense of what had happened. But I couldn't. The incident at Old Dunes Manor haunted my dreams, the chilling touch of that unseen hand imprinted on my memory. I tried to rationalize it, to explain it away, but I couldn't. Something had happened in that house, something that had left me shaken to my core. I knew I had to find Mike, to find out what had happened to him, to understand what had driven him to that isolated house, to those dark stories. I drove back to Billy's Brew, hoping he might be there, but the barista told me he hadn't been seen in weeks. "He's just vanished," she said, her voice filled with concern. "He left all his belongings at the house, but he's just gone." I left the cafe, feeling lost and desperate. I drove back to Old Dunes Manor, determined to find some clue as to what had happened to Mike. I stood at the doorway, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, inviting me in. This time, instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of inevitability, as if I were being drawn into a vortex of stories, a narrative I couldn't escape. I stepped inside, the air feeling more oppressive this time, a suffocating blanket of sorrow that pressed against my chest. The silence was louder this time, the house filled with a stillness that was almost tangible, as if it were waiting, holding its breath. I walked through the rooms, the shadows stretching long and thin in the fading light, the silence broken only by the crashing waves below. I reached the library, drawn by the silent allure of countless stories. The shelves were crammed with books, spines pressed together, their titles whispering secrets. I ran my fingers over the worn leather covers, feeling the weight of history, the stories that had been told, the stories that were yet to be written. As I explored the library, I noticed a small, wooden box tucked away on the top shelf. It was an antique box, ornately carved with symbols I couldn't recognize. I lifted the lid, revealing a single sheet of paper inside. It was an unfinished manuscript, written in Mike's hand. The words were written in a frantic scrawl, the ink smudged and blotted, as if he had been writing in a hurry, as if something was chasing him. The manuscript was titled, "The Ritual." It was a chilling story about a young man who had been obsessed with the idea of summoning spirits, who had become convinced that he could communicate with the dead. He had performed the ritual that Mike had described in his postcard, the candlelit circle, the mirror, the photograph. And he had succeeded. The young man had called forth a spirit, but the spirit had not come in peace. It had come with a hunger, with a thirst for revenge. It had sought him out, wanting to claim him, to take him back to the other side. The young man had run, but the spirit had pursued him, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. The manuscript ended abruptly, the last words written in a desperate plea. "I don't know what to do. I can't escape it. It's everywhere, all around me. Help." I dropped the page as if it had burned my hand. The air in the room felt cold, the silence heavy, and I could feel a presence near me, unseen but palpable. I looked up, my heart pounding in my chest, my eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing there. I ran out of the house, out of the darkness, back to the car, fueled by the adrenaline of fear and confusion. As I drove away from Old Dunes Manor, I could feel the weight of the stories on my shoulders, the whispers of the beyond following me. I knew that I had to find Mike, that his safety was at stake. I had to find some way to warn him, to help him escape the darkness he had so carelessly invited into his life. I knew I had to chase those whispers, to learn the stories that remained untold, to uncover the truth behind the tales. I could no longer ignore the whispers. I had to follow them. I had become part of the story, and I was scared. I was driving late one night on Highway 54, hauling a load of lumber down to the coast. Billy, my best friend and partner in crime, was riding shotgun, his head bobbing to the beat of whatever country song was blasting on the radio. It was the kind of night that makes you feel like you're the only person on the planet. The air was thick with fog, the visibility barely extending beyond a few feet, and the silence, save for the hum of the engine, was almost deafening. The fog was so dense that I could barely make out the highway's yellow lines. I drove slower than usual, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, every instinct screaming at me to pull over and wait for the fog to clear. But the deadline loomed, and I knew we needed to make it to the coast before sunrise. Just as we were settling into the monotony of the drive, Billy tapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, watch out!" he shouted, his voice a mix of excitement and fear. I glanced at him, then back at the road. It was too late. I slammed on the brakes, feeling the tires skid and the truck lurch forward. The sudden jolt was followed by a sickening thud. "Did you see that?" Billy exclaimed, eyes wide with shock. I could see the panic welling up in him, and it mirrored my own. The fog was so thick, I couldn't make out anything in front of me. I was barely able to see the headlights of the truck in front, which was mere feet away. "I thought I saw a girl back there," I said, my voice shaky. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the sweat pooling on my forehead. We both jumped out of the truck, the fog swirling around us like a ghostly mist. I flashed my headlights, desperate to see if there was anyone in the road. Nothing. "Maybe you've had too much coffee," Billy joked, his voice a bit strained. But there was no laughter in his voice, and I knew he was just as rattled as I was. "Come on, let's get back in the cab. We'll be fine." I climbed back into the cab, the feeling of dread settling over me like a shroud. I tried to convince myself it was just the fog playing tricks on me, but the fear gnawed at the edges of my mind. Not long after, I dozed off, exhausted from the long drive. It was barely 10 minutes later when Billy's sudden shout jolted me awake. "Jake! Jake!" he stammered, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. "I think you just had a nightmare or something," he said, his voice trembling. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the sleep off, but I was still on edge. As I gripped the wheel, trying to focus, I heard a thud on the hood. I looked up and nearly jumped out of my skin. The same girl from earlier was now perched on our truck, grinning through the windshield. "No way," I muttered. This couldn't be happening. This was insane. But she didn't fade away. She was right there, her eyes glinting in the dim light of the headlights. The more I looked at her, the more unnerved I became. I couldn't help but wonder if I was losing my mind. Billy was driving now, and I was trying to shake off the dread when we heard another bump. I turned to see the girl standing next to the truck, her smile wide and eerie. She was as solid as any living human being, her skin pale in the dim light. "Pull over!" I shouted, my voice cracking. Billy hit the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice shaky. That girl! She's here! I stammered, trying to catch my breath. We saw her back there. She's been following us. We stepped out of the truck, hoping some fresh air would help clear our heads. We found a diner a few miles down the road, the warm glow of its lights like a beacon in the darkness. I was desperate for some coffee and some sense of normalcy. As I asked the waitress about the highway, I could feel the heaviness in my chest, the fear starting to take root. I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Is there something weird about this place? I think I'm being haunted, I said, my voice tired. She shrugged, pouring coffee into my mug. You're not the first to ask. A few years back, a truck hit a girl right here. She was standing in the middle of the road, just like you saw her. She gave me a knowing look. People say her spirit still roams these parts. Billy went pale as he listened. Maybe we should just stay here for the night. I tried to laugh it off, but there was no humor in my voice, just a hint of desperation. Come on, I'm not scared of some ghosts. Let's keep moving. Back on the road, the fog thickened again, and I was starting to feel like we should have listened to Billy. I felt a strange sense of dread pulling at me, the weight of something unseen bearing down. Suddenly, a loud pop echoed from the back. Great, now we've got a flat, I grumbled. Come on, Billy, let's get this changed out. The fog was so thick, I couldn't see a thing, and the silence was unnerving. As we stepped out to check the tire, I saw Billy freeze, his eyes wide with horror. Jake! There's another you in the cab! He shouted, his voice choked with fear. I turned confused, and saw my own reflection in the rearview mirror, grinning back at me. Panic surged through me, the fear I had been trying to suppress overwhelmed me. Billy, that's not me! I shouted, my voice cracking. I'm right here. It's a reflection. Jake, there's another you sitting in the driver's seat, Billy shouted, his voice shaking. He looked terrified, and I knew it was more than just fear of the unknown. I knew he saw something. Billy bolted back to the truck, fear etched on his face. Come on, Jake, let's get out of here, he shouted. I rushed to the passenger side, and as I raised my flashlight, I spotted glowing eyes lurking beneath the truck. They were bright in the darkness. A stray dog yelped and ran off, and Billy exhaled in relief. Just a dog, man. But then, a voice crackled over the radio. Attention, this is Highway Patrol. We have reports of a ghost sighting near mile marker 23. Please drive safely. Billy looked like he might faint. We need to get out of here, he shouted, his voice rising in panic. This is bad. We're in the middle of nowhere. We need to get out of here. I kept driving, but the highway twisted into a shadowy path, the fog closing in around us, suffocating us. Finally, we hit a stretch where the trees loomed closer, the darkness so thick, it felt like we were driving into some sort of abyss. I felt Billy's anxiety mounting. I need to get out. Stop the truck, he shouted. I need to get out of here. I pulled over under the looming trees, the darkness so thick it felt like we were in a different world. Billy jumped out, sprinting into the woods, his footsteps barely audible in the thick fog. I stood there, unsure of what to do. After a while, I heard a truck approaching. I waved my arms, hoping it was someone who could help, someone who would understand. As the headlights neared, I squinted, only to see myself behind the wheel, grinning unnaturally. My blood ran cold. It was the same image I had seen in the rearview mirror. My heart sank. Billy, where are you going? I called out, my voice trembling with fear. I knew he wouldn't answer. In a flash, I grabbed some rope from the truck and threw it onto the road, tying Billy as he stumbled back, his face a mask of terror. I was acting on some primal instinct, a desperate act born of fear. Let's see how you like it, I said, my voice cold and strange. I felt the chill of the fog seep into my bones, a sense of darkness taking over. I drove off into the night, Billy's desperate screams fading behind me. The fog was so thick I could barely see the road, but I kept driving, the image of the girl in the rearview mirror a constant presence. I drove until the sky started to lighten, the darkness giving way to the first hints of dawn. But I was still driving, the highway stretching before me, endless and desolate. The fog started thin, the sun shining through the trees, the world coming back into focus. But I kept driving, the fear still gripping me. I could hear Billy's screams in the distance, faint, but relentless, echoing through the forest. But I kept driving. Now, they say on Highway 54, you can still see the ghost of a girl searching for her lost friend, waiting for the truck that took her life. They say if you're driving down that road, you can hear her faint screams, the sound of a lost soul lost in the fog. They say sometimes you see her standing in the middle of the road, a white figure shimmering in the darkness. But they also say that if you see a truck, the headlights blinding, a figure grinning in the rearview mirror, that it's too late to turn back. The road has claimed you. And the girl will always be waiting to claim her next victim. I had always been fascinated by history, especially the kind that was shrouded in mystery. The whispers of forgotten lives, the echoes of battles fought and lost, the legends whispered in hushed tones, they drew me in with an irresistible force. So, when I heard about Fort Rockford, just a short drive from Chicago, I couldn't resist the urge to check it out. The stories surrounding the fort were intriguing, tantalizingly incomplete, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Built overnight, a princess's well, and the strange happenings after dark, these whispers were enough to ignite my imagination. They painted a picture of a place steeped in an otherworldly atmosphere, a place where the veil between the past and present seemed thin, where the ghosts of forgotten lives might still walk. I booked my tickets, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension building inside me. The drive to Rockford was a blur of passing landscapes, my mind racing with the possibilities that awaited me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of something extraordinary, something that would rewrite my understanding of the world. As I approached the fort, a sense of awe washed over me. It stood proudly against the backdrop of the river, its old stone walls weathered by time, its silhouette etched against the vibrant sky. The fort seemed to radiate an ancient energy, a palpable weight of history that pressed down upon me. I parked my car, eager to step into the embrace of the past. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood. The fort looked even more imposing up close, its battlements reaching towards the sky like the weathered bones of a forgotten giant. I could almost hear the whispers of forgotten soldiers, the echoes of their laughter and their cries, echoing through the centuries. I wandered through the courtyard, taking in the details, the worn cobblestones, the ancient cannons silent and rusted. The air felt thicker, as if time itself had slowed, its rhythm dictated by the heartbeat of the fort. My eyes scanned the walls, searching for any signs of life, any indication of the stories I had heard. It was then that I saw him, an old man sitting on a bench, his eyes closed, his face etched with the wisdom of ages. He was dressed in a faded military coat, his hands gnarled and wrinkled like the bark of a tree. He looked like a relic of the past, a living embodiment of the fort's history. Curiosity and a sudden urge to connect with the past overcame me. I approached him cautiously, my voice almost a whisper. "Excuse me, sir," I began. "I know this is a long shot, but do you have any stories to tell about this fort?" He opened his eyes slowly, his gaze piercing me with an ancient wisdom. He looked past me, as if seeing something I couldn't. Then, his lips curled into a faint smile, and he spoke in a voice as old as the fort itself. "Stories? This fort is full of stories, young one. More than you can imagine." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "Some stories are best left untold," he said, his voice a soft murmur. "But there are others, whispers carried on the wind, that linger in the air, begging to be remembered." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I knew then that my trip to Fort Rockford was about to become something far more than a simple sightseeing adventure. It was a journey into the unknown, a chance to unravel the mysteries that had haunted this place for centuries. He told me about the fort's rapid construction, a tale whispered among the local townsfolk. They spoke of a mysterious force, a group of workers who seemed to appear out of nowhere, working tirelessly through the night, as if driven by an unseen power. They said the fort was built in a single night, its foundation laid in haste, its walls rising like a ghostly apparition against the backdrop of the moonlit sky. He then spoke of the princess, a legend etched in the very fabric of the fort. She was said to be the daughter of a prominent nobleman, her beauty renowned throughout the land. She was known to bathe in the well deep within the fort's courtyard, its waters said to possess restorative powers. But one day, she vanished, leaving only a whisper of her existence, a legend that echoed through the halls of the fort. Finally, he spoke of the strange happenings after dark. He told me of flickering lights, of disembodied voices, of shadows shifting and dancing in the moonlight. He spoke of a presence, an energy that lingered within the fort's walls, a silent witness to the past, a reminder of the lives that once thrived within its stony embrace. As he spoke, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard. I watched, enthralled, as the old man's words painted vivid pictures in my mind, bringing the tales of the fort to life. But as the last rays of sunlight faded, a sense of unease crept in, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The stories had awakened something within me, a primal fear that whispered of dangers lurking in the shadows. "You should leave now, young one," the old man said, his voice a low rasp. "The fort is not for the faint of heart. It holds secrets that can break a man." He stood up, his weathered face illuminated by the fading light. He looked at me with a knowing gaze, his eyes filled with a sadness that I couldn't quite understand. "Go," he said, his voice strained. "Don't stay too long." And with that, he turned and walked away, fading into the shadows like a ghost. I stood there for a moment, lost in thought, the old man's words echoing in my ears. I felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. The fort had captivated my imagination, its mysteries calling to me like a siren's song. But the old man's warning had planted a seed of doubt in my mind, a suspicion that something was amiss. Still, I couldn't resist the allure of the unknown. I decided to explore the fort, to uncover its secrets for myself. I wandered through the various rooms, marveling at the intricate woodwork and faded murals. The fort's history lingered in every creak of the floorboards, every faded inscription on the walls. It felt as if time had stopped here, preserving the echoes of a forgotten world. I found myself drawn to a room with a magnificent ceiling, its carvings intricate and beautiful. The light streaming through the tall windows cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere both mesmerizing and unsettling. I set up my camera, adjusting the settings to get the perfect shot. As I leaned in closer, I felt an inexplicable thrill, a surge of energy that seemed to emanate from the carvings above. It was then that I noticed it, a drop of water landing squarely on my lens. I frowned, baffled. How could there be water so high up? I opened the lens, pulled out a cloth, and sat down to clean it. As I was focused on the task, I sensed something beside me. I turned, but there was no one there. The air felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. My heart pounded in my chest, and I dismissed it as my imagination running wild. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a firm shove from behind. I stumbled forward, losing my balance, and hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my arm, and my camera skidded away. Groaning, I pushed myself up, brushing off the dust and checking my camera. To my surprise, there wasn't a scratch on it. I let out a relieved breath. I couldn't imagine losing my prized possession on this trip. Still rattled, I decided to look through the lens one more time. As I peered through, I saw her, a girl standing in the corner of the room, smiling and beckoning me closer. She was striking, dressed in clothes that looked like they belonged to another era, a simple white gown with a delicate lace collar. Her hair, a cascade of auburn curls, framed a face that was both ethereal and enigmatic. My heart raced. I'd never seen anyone like her before. I pulled my camera away to look at the empty corner, but when I glanced back, she was gone. Confused, I looked through the lens again, and there she was, still smiling, her finger curled invitingly. Something about her gaze was mesmerizing, almost magnetic, as if she were calling to me from across the chasm of time. Compelled to investigate, I started moving toward the spot where she had stood. It was only a few steps, but each one felt heavy with anticipation. Just as I got closer, a whisper brushed against my ear. "Meet me by the well." Chills ran down my spine. The well. I had heard about it. The very place where the princess used to bathe. But as the words lingered in the air, doubt gnawed at me. What was I doing? I paused for a moment, glancing around the room, but it felt like the walls were closing in, as if the fort itself was urging me forward. Ignoring my instincts, I pushed through the uncertainty and walked out into the courtyard. The night was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon. I felt drawn to the well, the cool night air sending shivers down my spine. As I approached, I noticed a silhouette by the edge, illuminated by the moonlight. It was her again. The same girl, the same inviting smile. My heart raced as I reached the well, my curiosity overpowering my fear. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. She tilted her head, and for a moment it felt like time stood still. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, seemed to pierce my very soul. "I'm waiting for you," she whispered, her voice soft and ethereal, as if it were a voice from a dream. Just then, a gust of wind swept through, and she vanished, leaving me alone by the well. The chill in the air lingered, and I could feel the weight of something inexplicable, a presence that filled the space where she had stood. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing that this wasn't just a fort, it was a gateway to stories untold. As I made my way back, the thrill of the encounter mixed with a lingering sense of unease. I had come to explore a piece of history, but I left with more questions than answers. Fort Rockford had revealed a glimpse of its past, a glimpse I would never forget. The next morning, I found myself standing by the river, gazing at the fort across the water. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It felt as if the fort was waking up, stretching its ancient limbs, welcoming a new day. I thought about the old man, the princess, and the girl who had beckoned me to the well. I thought about the whispers of the fort, the stories that seemed to echo through its walls. I knew I had only scratched the surface of its mysteries, but I also knew that I wasn't ready to delve any deeper. I turned and walked away, leaving Fort Rockford behind. As I drove back, I thought about the old man's words. Some stories are best left untold. He was right. Some secrets are better left buried, some mysteries best left unsolved. But I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret as I drove away. I had a feeling that Fort Rockford would continue to call to me, its secrets whispering on the wind, beckoning me to return. And I knew deep down that I would. I would return to Fort Rockford, not to uncover its secrets, but to listen to its stories, to understand its whispers, to find the truth within its shadowed heart. I've always been someone who pays close attention to the little things, details most people miss. It's not about correcting them, though. I'm not that type. But I notice. It started as an odd feeling, a subtle irritant like a grain of sand in my shoe. People around me began saying people, when they meant a singular person. The first time it happened, it was a slip. A mistake. It had to be. I was watching a local news report one evening when the anchor said, "The people who was hurt in the car crash is recovering at the hospital." I frowned. That's not right. She should have said, person. I let it slide. No one's perfect, and it had been a long day. But then, it happened again. And again. In random conversations at the grocery store, in interviews on TV, in casual chats at work. Everyone started using the word people to describe a singular person. Did you meet the new people in the office today? Or, that people at the coffee shop was rude. It gnawed at me. At first, I just mentally noted it, assuming it was an isolated mistake. But the mistakes multiplied. At a bar one night, my friend Josh leaned across the table and said, "That people over there has been staring at you." I laughed. "You mean person, right?" Josh paused, his brow furrowed. "No, I mean people." "What are you talking about?" "You used the wrong word. You said people when it should have been person. One person, singular." His confusion deepened. People is the singular, man. You feeling okay? That hit me like a punch to the gut. I was sure it was just a simple misunderstanding, until I started noticing it everywhere. People was now being used in place of person. At first, I thought everyone was in on some kind of prank, a massive joke at my expense. But no one was laughing. The more I tried to correct people, the more concerned looks I got. Soon, I stopped mentioning it altogether, unsure if I was losing my grip on reality, or if the world had shifted beneath my feet. One day, I Googled it. Person versus people singular, I typed in desperation. But the internet had betrayed me too. Every source I found said that people was always singular, and persons was a term that never existed. Had I lost my mind? The world around me had become foreign. The city I'd lived in for years, Evergreen Springs, now had streets that seemed to bend in unfamiliar ways. Restaurants I'd frequented for years had different names, serving dishes I had never heard of. One of my favorite movies, The Shining, was completely different. The iconic "Here's Johnny" scene didn't exist. Instead, Jack Nicholson's character repeatedly yelled, "Open the door, people!" over and over again. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. Things got worse. My best friend Melanie, an editor for a major publishing house, was now telling me how difficult it was to find good people for her book projects. I sat in silence as she explained, using people over and over again in place of person. I couldn't take it anymore. "Mel, you mean person, right?" I asked, trying to mask my desperation. She tilted her head, her expression soft but confused. "No. I said it right. People. It's always been people." I left that conversation feeling like I was unraveling. What was happening? Was I trapped in some sort of alternate universe where everything was subtly, but fundamentally, wrong? Weeks passed, and things only grew more unsettling. There were other changes, too. The coffee shop I went to every morning now only served tea. The grocery store aisles were rearranged in ways that felt designed to disorient me. There was no sign of the cereal I'd been buying for years. Even my own apartment, my safe place, started to feel different. The furniture was slightly out of place, as if someone had been in there while I was gone, shifting everything just enough to make it noticeable. One night, I woke up sweating, my heart pounding. The word people echoed in my head, blending with other inconsistencies I had noticed. The moon was larger now, its glow too bright and wrong. And had it always been green? I couldn't remember anymore. I couldn't trust my own mind. The next day, my boss, Nathan, called me into his office. "Blake, people have been worried about you. You seem distracted. Is everything okay?" I could barely form words. Nathan had been the last normal thing in my life. Even he was now using people for singular nouns. I nodded, but inside I knew I needed to find a way out of this nightmare. I couldn't let the madness consume me. But the more I searched for answers, the more it seemed like no one else saw what I did. My breaking point came when I visited my mother's house, seeking comfort in familiarity. The old family photos hanging on the walls looked distorted. The faces, once clear and comforting, were now smudged, blurred, as if the very fabric of memory was erasing itself. And when my mother referred to herself as people, something inside me snapped. I had to leave. I ran out of her house and drove aimlessly, the world blurring around me as my mind fractured, unsure if it was me or reality itself that was breaking apart. I spent the next few weeks holed up in my apartment, avoiding everyone. But even in isolation, the changes continued. Now, mirrors refused to show my reflection. My own voice echoed back at me, but wrong, doubled, warped, like two people were speaking in tandem. My phone was useless. It showed me pictures of people I knew, my family, my friends, but their faces were distorted, grotesque, like something out of a horror movie. I couldn't bring myself to call anyone. It felt like I was reaching out into a void, a reality that no longer recognized me. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, the silence crackling with unease. The walls seemed to pulsate, like they were breathing, and every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. I'd hear whispers in the darkness, voices that weren't mine, but that seemed to echo some forgotten, unspoken truth. One night, amidst the fear and confusion, I stumbled upon a strange website. I had been surfing the internet aimlessly, desperately searching for something, anything, that would make sense of the chaos. It was a forum, a strange community of people who called themselves the Singulars. The website's design was primitive, almost archaic. The website content focused on a single point, the importance of using the correct language. They called it the singularity. They argued that the misuse of people was a symptom of a larger shift, a creeping corruption of reality. Their words resonated with a part of me that had been buried deep beneath the growing fear and confusion. I made a new account, a new identity. Observer 19. There, I found a community of people who felt the same way I did. We shared stories, anxieties, and even a growing sense of hope. There was Sarah, a school teacher who noticed the gradual change in her students' textbooks, how words were being subtly manipulated. There was Mark, a musician, who could no longer decipher the lyrics of his favorite songs. His memories of those lyrics had been overwritten with the wrong words. There was Anna, a librarian, who'd seen firsthand how the library catalog was being systematically changed. We discussed our experiences, the subtle shifts in the world that others seemed oblivious to. We shared our fear, our desperation, and our growing conviction that something was terribly wrong. We spent countless hours dissecting the changes, searching for patterns, trying to understand how this was happening. It felt like we were the last bastions of sanity in a world that was slipping away from us. I read countless articles, blogs, and forum posts. I even started digging through old dictionaries and encyclopedias, searching for clues. But there was nothing. This was a subtle shift, a gradual erosion of reality that seemed to be happening to the very fabric of language itself. One night, after a particularly intense discussion on the forum, I had a flashback. It was from my childhood, a memory I'd forgotten. My grandfather, a man of few words and a deep love for books, had once said to me, "Language is the foundation of everything. It's the bridge between thought and reality. If you lose your grip on language, you lose your grip on the world." His words echoed in my mind with a newly found clarity. Could he have been talking about this? Could he have foreseen this change, this subtle corruption of reality that began with language? I started to believe that the solution might lie in language itself. If the world was being rewritten, if language was being subtly twisted, then maybe we needed to find a way to resist, to hold on to the truth. I started to pay more attention to my surroundings. I took notes, meticulously recording every instance of the incorrect use of people. Some of the members of the Singulars felt it was more than just the misuse of the word people. They saw it as a symbol of a bigger problem, a corruption of the world that was spreading beyond language. The world felt different. Not just in the details, but in the whole picture. I'm not sure if I believe them. Maybe I'm still clinging to the idea that it's just a mistake, an error in the matrix. But the more I see, the more I read, the more I realize that the world is changing. And language is at the heart of it all. I don't know what will happen next. But I know I can't ignore it anymore. I have to fight for the world I remember, for the truth that still feels like a flickering flame in the encroaching darkness. I have to fight for the singularity. I can't let the madness consume me. I must protect the world I know, and I must protect the language that binds it together. Maybe, just maybe, if we can hold on to the truth, if we can resist the tide of this subtle corruption, the world will find its way back to the singularity. Maybe the world will find its way back to me. But for now, I'm just a man, an observer, trying to make sense of a world that's slipping away. I just hope I'm not losing my mind. When Lily came back from her work trip, everything felt wrong. It wasn't something I noticed right away, but there was a heaviness in the air as soon as she walked through the door. I wanted to chalk it up to exhaustion from her travels, but it was more than that. Her smile seemed forced, Her eyes didn't have the same light. There was this strange stillness about her, like she was holding something inside, something I couldn't see. At first, I didn't say anything. I figured she needed a few days to recover. I kept asking about her trip, trying to pull out stories about her meetings or the hotel, but her answers were clipped, almost robotic. She would just say, "It was fine," or "Nothing special." Usually, Lily loved to talk about the little details of her day, but now, she seemed uninterested, detached even. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, Lily came into the kitchen, her expression blank. She stood beside me, her hand hovering near my shoulder, her eyes fixated on something behind me. It was almost as if she wasn't even seeing me. "Lily? What's wrong?" I asked, turning to face her. Her gaze shifted to me, but there was no recognition in her eyes. "I'm fine," she mumbled, her voice flat and emotionless. She then turned back to the empty space behind me, her hand reaching out as if to grasp at something invisible. My heart pounded. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. What was she looking at? What was she reaching for? "Lily, are you okay?" I asked again, my voice trembling slightly. She slowly turned back to me, a confused look flickering across her face. "Yes, I'm fine," she said, her voice a whisper. "Just tired." I didn't believe her for a second. There was something wrong, something very wrong. This wasn't the Lily I knew. This wasn't my wife. That night, I woke up and found her sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My heart jumped. "Lily? What are you doing?" She didn't answer at first. After what felt like forever, she finally muttered, "I couldn't sleep." Her voice was strange, like it wasn't hers. It sounded distant, hollow. I brushed it off, thinking she was just overly tired. But that night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling, but I forced myself to sleep, convincing myself it was nothing. Over the next few days, her behavior only got weirder. I'd catch her just standing in random rooms, not moving, staring at something only she could see. When I asked what she was doing, she'd shrug it off, saying she was lost in thought. But it didn't feel right. Her movements were too stiff, her responses too rehearsed. The worst part was her eyes. They looked empty. Whenever I tried to hold her gaze, it was like I was looking into the eyes of someone I didn't know, someone who wasn't really there anymore. One night, while we were sitting on the couch, she reached out and grabbed my hand, something she'd done a million times before, but this time, her grip was ice cold. Her hand felt wrong. I looked over at her, and she was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't love. It wasn't even recognition. It was something else. Something darker. That night, I woke up again, this time to the sound of her whispering. At first, I thought she was talking in her sleep, but when I looked over, she wasn't in bed. I got up, heart pounding, and followed the sound of her voice to the living room. She was sitting on the floor, her back to me, talking softly, but I couldn't make out the words. "Lily?" I called out softly. She stopped mid-sentence. There was silence, thick and unnerving. Slowly, she turned her head, not all the way, just enough for me to see her profile in the dim light. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. "I didn't hear you," she said, her voice low and monotone. I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me. I didn't know what to do. I stood there frozen, my mind racing, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke or if I was dreaming. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a dream. Something was happening to her. Or maybe, something had already happened. The next day, she acted like nothing was wrong. She went through her usual routine, making coffee, scrolling through her phone, but it was like watching someone go through the motions of a life they didn't belong to. She didn't even ask if I was okay, even though I'm sure she knew I'd been up all night. That evening, after dinner, I caught her standing by the window, whispering again. This time, I could hear her more clearly. She was saying my name, over and over, but not in the way someone would call out for you. It was like she was chanting it, as if she were trying to summon me. I felt my skin crawl. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice shaky. She turned to face me, and for a split second, I swear her eyes were black, completely black. Then, just as quickly, they were normal again, and she smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was something twisted, something that made my blood run cold. "I've brought someone back with me," she whispered, her voice dripping with something inhuman. I backed away, feeling the walls of the room closing in on me. I didn't know what she meant. I didn't want to know. That night, I locked myself in the guest room, and I heard her pacing the halls, mumbling to herself in that eerie voice. The words were garbled, but one phrase kept coming through. "I'm not alone." The next morning, she was gone. Not physically, but gone. She sat at the table, blankly staring ahead, her hands motionless, her body rigid. I called out to her, but there was no response. It was as if her soul had left, and what remained was just a shell. I left the house later that day, unable to take the suffocating atmosphere anymore. I drove for hours, aimlessly wandering, until I found myself in a small, quiet town far from home. I checked into a motel, hoping for some peace and quiet, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I spent the next few days trying to forget everything that had happened. I tried to distract myself with books, movies, anything to keep the horrors that had unfolded in my home out of my mind. But every so often, I'd catch myself staring at the TV, my heart pounding, convinced I saw a flicker of something dark in the corner of my eye. One evening, as I was sitting in the motel room, I noticed something strange on the wall. It looked like a faint, almost invisible mark, a sort of shadow, like the outline of a hand. It was so faint I could hardly even make it out, but I knew it wasn't there before. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by something outside the window. But the mark didn't fade. It actually seemed to grow darker as the day went on. Panic welled up inside me. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to get out, get as far away from this place as possible. I had to find someone, anyone, who could help me. I packed my things and drove through the night. I drove until the sun began to rise, and I finally pulled over at a gas station, utterly exhausted. As I stepped out of my car, I felt a cold dread wash over me. The mark, the faint handprint, was there on the side of my car. It was even more distinct now, almost as if it had been drawn with charcoal. I stumbled into the gas station, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to tell someone, anyone, what was happening. I needed help. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. She asked if I was okay, and I blurted out everything that had happened. I told her about Lily, the strange events, the whispering, the empty eyes, the darkness. She listened patiently, even as I rambled on, my voice cracking with fear. When I was done, she simply shook her head and said, "You need to go home. You need to face whatever's going on." "But what if it's dangerous?" I pleaded. "What if it's something I can't fight?" She raised an eyebrow. "You wouldn't feel this fear if it wasn't something you could fight. We all carry a little darkness inside us. It's just a matter of choosing which one we feed." Her words, though cryptic, gave me a sense of hope. It was like she was saying, I wasn't alone in this. There was something inside me that could fight back. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to save Lily. I drove back home that day, with a newfound determination burning inside me. I knew I had to try to reach Lily, to reach the woman I loved, even if it meant confronting whatever had taken her over. When I arrived back at the house, it was eerily quiet. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I slowly opened the door, my hand trembling. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on a blank spot on the wall, her hand hovering just above a cup of coffee that sat untouched in front of her. She didn't notice me enter. She didn't even seem to notice that I was there. "Lily?" I said softly, my voice trembling. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. "Lily, please talk to me," I said, my voice cracking. I need to help you. She turned her head slowly, as if her neck had been broken. It was like watching a puppet being manipulated by an invisible hand. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition, a hint of the Lily I knew, before it was gone. It's too late, she whispered, her voice a hollow echo. I brought it back with me. She stood up, her body stiff and unnatural. Her movements were jerky, like she was trying to move but couldn't quite get her limbs to work properly. She walked towards me, her eyes fixed on me, her hand outstretched, her fingers reaching out like claws. It's coming for you, too, she whispered. You'll be just like me. I backed away, terrified. I didn't know what to do. What could I do? Whatever had taken over Lily had been coming for me the whole time. But now it was here. It was right there, in front of me. I looked around the room, desperately searching for something, anything, to use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a vase on the table, and I grabbed it. As I held it in my hand, I felt a strange strength surge through me. It's not too late, I said, my voice firm, but the fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. I can fight it. Lily's eyes widened. Her face contorted, and her expression was a mixture of fear, anger, and something else, something I couldn't name. You can't fight it, she said, her voice ragged. It's stronger than you. You can't win. I took a step forward, my hand clenched around the vase. I have to try, I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounding in my chest. You're only making it worse, she said, her voice cracking. You're letting it in. I didn't understand what she meant. All I knew was that I had to do something. I had to fight for Lily. I had to fight for myself. I took another step forward, and then another, and then I lunged. The vase shattered against the wall, and shards of glass flew everywhere. Lily screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that seemed to echo through the house. And then, the lights flickered, and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know if I had won or lost. I didn't even know if Lily was still with me. My hand reached out, feeling around in the darkness. I felt a cold, smooth surface, and I knew it was Lily's hand. Her hand felt different now. It felt cold and clammy, like a dead thing. But she was still there. I held tight to her hand, and then I pulled her close. Lily, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please don't let go. She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. The darkness was all around us, and I could feel the presence of something else, something dark and terrible, looming over us. It was like a predator circling its prey. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I didn't let go of Lily's hand. I held on tight. I had to be strong. I had to fight for her. I had to fight for myself. The fear was real. The darkness was real. But so was the love. And the love was stronger. Even in the darkness, I knew I was not alone. It all started with a simple text from my friend, Josh. He sent me a Spotify link to his latest playlist captioned, "Dude, this is going to blow your mind." Normally, I'd open it without a second thought, but something about the way the message lingered on my screen felt off. I hesitated. Josh had been acting strange lately, withdrawn, almost paranoid. He kept talking about hearing weird things in the background of his music, like hidden voices or eerie sounds, but I chalked it up to his usual conspiracy theories. Against my better judgment, I clicked the link. It was just music, after all, what harm could it do? The playlist loaded with the title, Frequencies. The first track was an ambient, almost haunting instrumental piece. As the music flowed through my headphones, I felt a chill creep up my spine. The melody was dissonant, unsettling, yet strangely hypnotic. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then I started hearing it, faint whispers, almost like distant conversations, buried deep within the sound. I paused the track and yanked off my headphones, my heart racing. For a moment, I sat in silence, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. I even sent Josh a text. "What's with the creepy whispers in the background? Is that part of the track?" He didn't respond. Curiosity got the better of me, and I hit play again, skipping to the second song. This one was worse. There were distinct voices this time, not just whispers. It sounded like someone chanting, but in a language I couldn't recognize. The more I listened, the more the voices became clearer, like they were trying to communicate directly with me. My chest tightened, and I began to feel this growing sense of dread, like something was lurking just beyond the music. Suddenly, I heard a loud, distorted noise, a screech that sounded like metal being ripped apart, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not in the song, right behind me. I whipped around in my chair, but my room was empty. My breathing quickened. There was no one else in the apartment, yet the feeling of being watched was undeniable. The music in my headphones was still playing, and the footsteps didn't stop. They were pacing behind me, growing louder and more deliberate. I pulled the headphones off again, but this time, the footsteps didn't stop. They continued, echoing through the room as if someone, or something, was walking circles around me. My skin prickled with cold sweat. The room, once familiar and safe, felt foreign, like I wasn't alone anymore. Desperate, I reached for my phone to call Josh, but just as I unlocked it, a new text appeared from him. "You heard them, didn't you?" I froze. My hands were trembling as I typed back. "Heard what?" The reply came almost instantly. "They're in the music. Once you listen, they find you." I stared at the message, my mind racing to process what was happening. Was this some kind of sick joke? I slammed my laptop shut, trying to shut off the music, but the sounds, the footsteps, the whispers, continued, like they were seeping out of the closed device. It was everywhere now, filling the room, growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Josh. "It's too late. Don't try to stop it." I dropped my phone, panic taking over. The lights in my room flickered violently, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. The footsteps stopped, but now I could hear something else, something breathing, shallow and ragged, right next to my ear. I bolted from my chair and ran to the front door, but the second I grabbed the handle, it wouldn't budge. The air felt thick, oppressive, like I was trapped in a nightmare. My head was spinning, heart pounding as the whispers became deafening, voices chanting my name over and over. Then, just as quickly as it started, the noise stopped. I stood there in silence, my body shaking uncontrollably, as I slowly turned back toward my desk. My laptop had opened on its own. The playlist was still playing, but now, instead of music, there was just static, loud, bone-chilling static. And through the crackling sound, a single voice cut through, clear as day. "We found you." That was the last time I ever opened a playlist from Josh. The memory of that night, of the terrifying sounds and the chilling voice, still haunts me. It's a constant reminder that sometimes, the things we think are harmless can be the most dangerous. I tried to forget about the experience, to bury it deep in my mind. But I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, of the whispers always lurking just out of sight. Days turned into weeks, and the fear gradually faded. I convinced myself it was just a bad hallucination brought on by stress or a weird glitch in the playlist. But something felt off, a nagging sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Then, one afternoon, while browsing the internet, I stumbled upon a website dedicated to paranormal phenomena. It spoke about sonic frequencies, how certain sounds could affect the human mind, and how they were sometimes used for communication, even telepathy. The article mentioned a group that conducted experiments with manipulating sounds to create altered states of consciousness, to tap into the subconscious mind. They claimed they were able to communicate with people through these frequencies, even influence their thoughts and actions. Suddenly, the chilling events with Josh's playlist made sense. The whispers I heard, the footsteps, the voice through the static, it all pointed towards a targeted sonic manipulation, a deliberate attempt to reach me, to influence me. But why? I couldn't stop thinking about it, the implications of what I'd stumbled upon. This wasn't just a weird playlist, it was a powerful technology, a way to manipulate people's minds. And I was a target. Driven by a desperate need to understand, I started researching. I dug deeper into these sonic experiments, learning about the potential dangers of these frequencies. The more I learned, the more terrified I became. It wasn't just about whispers and footsteps anymore. I was dealing with something far more sinister. I felt like I was on the edge of a conspiracy, a hidden world of manipulation and control that I was just starting to understand. I decided to reach out to Josh to see what he knew. But my text went unanswered. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. His phone seemed to be off. Panic surged through me. Had something happened to him? Was he in danger? Or was he involved in this somehow? I started to retrace his steps, remembering the stories he told about his strange experiences with music. He mentioned a website, a forum where he'd been exchanging ideas about these frequencies, about experiments and potential applications. I found the forum, a hidden corner of the internet populated by a shadowy group of individuals with an unsettling obsession with manipulating minds through sonic frequencies. Their language was cryptic, their intentions unclear, but their interest in Josh and his experiments was unmistakable. I read through the forum, piecing together information, searching for clues about what had happened to Josh. It was a dangerous game, but I felt compelled to uncover the truth. The forum posts spoke about specific frequencies, about creating a channel through music to influence a targeted individual. They spoke of manipulating emotions, thoughts, and even behaviors. And then I saw it, a message from a user named Frequency, a name that sent a chill down my spine. He's ready. The channel is open. We'll bring him around. Ready? Who's ready? Another user questioned. The one who's been listening. The one who opened the door. What does that mean? It means we found him. And he's ours. My heart pounded in my chest. They were talking about Josh, about me. They had access to my phone, my data. They were watching me. I knew I had to get out of there, to get away from this dangerous world I'd stumbled into. But I also felt a sense of responsibility, a need to warn others, to expose what was happening. I began to piece together a plan, a way to fight back, to expose the truth about these frequencies and the people who were using them for their own sinister purposes. The experience with Josh's playlist had changed everything. It had opened my eyes to a world I never knew existed, a world of manipulation hidden in plain sight. I knew I was walking a dangerous path, but I couldn't turn back. I had to expose the truth, even if it meant risking my own safety. The stakes were high, but I was determined to fight for what was right. The fight for my sanity, and perhaps my life, had just begun.